While hiking in the mountains, a stumble changed everything. We pretended to be injured, and what my husband told me later was even more shocking. The morning sun filtered gently through the pines as Emily zipped her light jacket and tightened the straps of her hiking shoes. She glanced toward Robert, who stood near the edge of their driveway, checking the car's trunk for the third time to make sure everything they needed was packed. His movements were slow, methodical, the way they had become over the last few years. Retirement had slowed them both, but it hadn't dulled their desire for moments like this, a light trail through the Colorado woods, just the two of them and the family they hardly knew anymore. Their son Adam had suggested the hike. A simple, scenic route through the hills near Estes Park, suitable for all ages. He and Jessica would meet them at the trailhead, he'd said, a chance to reconnect after too many years of polite phone calls and brief holiday visits. Emily wanted to believe this was a gesture of reconciliation. Robert remained skeptical, though he hadn't said as much. His silence said enough. As they pulled out of the driveway, the quiet between them settled in comfortably. They had grown used to silence in recent years, the kind that didn't hurt, just lingered. Every now and then, Emily would glance out the window and recall birthdays missed, conversations avoided, and how Adam had grown into a man neither of them quite understood anymore. Jessica had always been polite, if distant. Emily had tried, truly, to form some kind of bond with her, but Jessica kept her affections guarded like a diary no one was meant to read. They reached the trailhead a little after 9 o'clock in the morning. Adam and Jessica were already there, standing by a silver SUV, sipping from matching metal water bottles. Adam waved, and Emily's heart lifted for a moment. His smile was genuine, or at least it looked that way. Jessica offered a nod and a small smile of her own, restrained, measured. She was wearing pristine hiking gear and mirrored sunglasses that obscured her expression. "Glad you made it," Adam said, walking toward them and giving his mother a side hug. He hesitated with Robert, then offered a firm handshake. "It's a beautiful day." "It is," Robert replied. "We could use more of these." They set off on the trail, the path winding gently through groves of pine and aspen. The air was crisp, the kind that filled the lungs and made everything feel just a bit cleaner. Emily let herself enjoy it, for a while. She chatted lightly with Jessica about the foliage, commented on the color of the leaves, asked a few questions about her work in real estate. Jessica responded politely, but never asked anything in return. Still, Emily pressed on, determined not to let the silence win. Further ahead, Robert and Adam walked side by side, saying little. Emily could sense the tension between them like static in the air. It wasn't new. It had been building since the day Adam had decided to take over the management of the family business, the same business Robert had built from the ground up, long before Adam was born. Emily remembered the quiet arguments at the dinner table, the way Adam's tone would harden when he felt questioned. Now, with the business still functioning but barely holding on, there were more questions than answers. They stopped at a small clearing about an hour into the walk. The view opened to a valley below, a quiet stretch of forest stretching as far as the eye could see. A few birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, water trickled over rocks. It was peaceful, deceptively so. "Let's take a break here," Adam suggested. "We brought some trail mix and water." Emily sat on a flat rock, stretching her legs carefully. Robert remained standing, staring out over the ridge, arms crossed. Jessica pulled a thermos from her backpack and poured tea into small cups. Everything seemed fine, surface level pleasant, like a family photo where no one is actually smiling with their eyes. Then Adam checked his phone. A flicker of frustration passed over his face, gone in a second. He stepped away to take a call, lowering his voice as he walked toward a patch of trees. Jessica watched him go, her expression unreadable. "You know," she said, her voice low, almost casual, "I wasn't sure you two would agree to come." Emily looked up. "Why wouldn't we?" Jessica shrugged. "Well, you're usually cautious about these things." Robert turned, catching the last part of the sentence. "We came because we wanted to." Jessica offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course." Just saying, sometimes change can be good. Emily nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. There was something off in the way Jessica said it. Like the words carried weight, meaning layered beneath pleasantries. Adam returned a moment later, phone tucked away, and suggested they keep walking. The trail looped around a gentle incline, nothing steep, just enough to get the heart working. Emily fell into step beside Robert again, feeling the unease settle in her chest like a fog. This was supposed to be relaxing, she whispered. Robert didn't answer at first. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Let's see how it plays out." They walked on. The trail narrowed ahead, winding between a steep slope and a cluster of tall rocks. Emily stepped carefully, mindful of where she placed her feet. Adam and Jessica were a few paces ahead, speaking in hushed tones she couldn't quite hear. Then she felt it, the slight shift of earth beneath her boot, a loose stone where she hadn't expected one. Her balance faltered. She reached for Robert's arm just as her foot slid forward, and in the blink of an eye, she was falling, tumbling sideways down the incline. Robert grabbed her, but the motion dragged him off balance too. Together, they slid a few feet down a rocky slope, finally landing in a patch of soft underbrush. The fall wasn't far, but it was enough. Emily felt a sharp pain in her wrist, and Robert groaned, clutching his leg. "Are you okay?" she asked, heart pounding. "I'll live," he muttered, wincing. They were partially hidden from the trail above, tucked beneath a ledge. Voices floated down, Adam and Jessica, panicked at first, then quieter. "We have to go help them," Jessica said. Then, a pause. And something neither Emily nor Robert expected to hear. "Maybe this changes everything," Adam said. "Maybe now, they'll stop interfering." Emily met Robert's eyes. The pain in her wrist faded beneath a deeper, colder realization. Something was very, very wrong. The scent of crushed pine needles filled Emily's nose as she lay still, cradling her wrist against her chest. Her pulse throbbed in her ears, but her mind was sharper than it had been moments earlier. Her thoughts raced, not from the fall, not from the ache radiating through her arm, but from the words she had just heard. Not imagined. Heard. Maybe now, they'll stop interfering. Robert, seated a few feet away, struggled to shift his weight. His knee had twisted awkwardly, and though he kept his expression controlled, she knew the pain was real. But even that seemed distant now. They didn't speak at first. The silence between them was not the gentle quiet they had shared in the car, it was strained, heavy with questions. Above them, voices continued, muffled, fragmented by the slope and the breeze that rustled the branches overhead. Emily tried to lift herself slightly, enough to hear without drawing attention. She could just make out Jessica's voice, taut and hurried. "Should get help. But if they're not badly hurt." Adam cut her off. "We can't risk going back to the cabin with them like this. What if they start asking questions again? We can't leave them here, Adam." A pause. "Then, we won't. But this buys us time." Emily felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest, not fear, exactly. Not yet. More like the early warning signs of a storm. She looked over at Robert, who was already watching her, his jaw clenched. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, careful to keep her voice low. He nodded once. It would have been easy, too easy, to believe they were misinterpreting the words. But Robert's face told her he'd heard them the same way she had. And worse, he seemed to understand them more clearly. Minutes passed before Adam appeared at the top of the slope, crouching slightly to see them better. His voice shifted into a careful concern, practiced and measured. "Dad? Mom? Are you all right?" Emily forced a groan, enough to sell the act without sounding theatrical. "I think I twisted my arm," she called up. "Robert's leg, he's hurt." "All right, don't move. We'll come down slowly." Jessica followed a moment later, her expression tight but composed. She carried a small first aid kit, which she opened as she knelt beside Emily. Adam helped Robert sit up straighter, examining the leg without meeting his father's eyes. "We'll get you both out of here," Adam said. Slowly. No need to rush. There was no mention of what they had said earlier. No acknowledgement. Just practiced concern and hollow reassurances. Emily let herself wince as Jessica wrapped her wrist in an elastic bandage. The touch was gentle but impersonal, like a nurse handling a stranger. When Robert tried to stand, he grimaced and leaned heavily on Adam, who offered his shoulder with quiet effort. Together, they climbed the short slope back to the trail, moving cautiously. The hike back was slow and filled with shallow conversation. Adam talked about the terrain, the weather, the trail markers they'd passed earlier. None of it mattered. The words only deepened the unease that hung between them. By the time they reached the parking lot, the sun was high overhead. Jessica offered to drive Emily and Robert to the nearest urgent care clinic, but Robert declined, insisting they go to the hospital in Boulder instead. "It's more familiar," he said. "Closer to home." Adam offered to drive their car and follow them, but Robert refused that too, saying he didn't want their son spending the rest of his weekend waiting in a hospital lobby. "I'll send updates," Emily added, her tone flat. They parted with polite nods and stiff goodbyes. Back inside their vehicle, Emily and Robert sat in silence again, but this time it wasn't comfortable. Robert started the engine and pulled onto the road without a word. Half an hour passed before either of them spoke. "Do you think they meant for us to fall?" Emily asked finally, her voice barely audible. Robert kept his eyes on the road. "No. That slope wasn't steep enough to plan anything." "But they're hiding something," she said. He nodded slowly. "Yes. They are." Back home, the emergency room visit confirmed a wrist sprain and a minor ligament strain in Robert's knee. The doctors recommended rest, ice, and follow-up with a physical therapist. Emily took the instructions in stride but kept her thoughts elsewhere. That night, in the quiet of their home, she sat in the living room with a cup of tea, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. Pictures of Adam as a boy, smiling with scraped knees and chocolate-covered cheeks. A graduation photo. A wedding portrait, where Jessica's smile already seemed reserved. None of it matched the people they had spent the day with. Robert joined her a few minutes later, walking carefully with a cane borrowed from the hospital. "We need to understand what's going on," he said, lowering himself into the armchair across from her. Emily looked up. "And how do we do that? Ask them directly? Pretend nothing happened and wait for them to slip? We pretend to be more injured than we are," Robert said bluntly. "We use the time." Emily blinked. "You mean we stay quiet?" "We stay quiet, and we observe. We see what changes when they think we're out of the way." She stared into her tea, the liquid dark and still. "This isn't how I imagined retirement." He allowed a rare smile. "You imagined sitting in a rocking chair?" "I imagined spending time with our family. Voluntarily." Robert's smile faded. "This isn't about betrayal, Emily." "Not yet. But something's wrong. We built that company with 30 years of work. And they're making decisions without us." Emily thought of the late-night phone calls Adam used to make when he first took over, full of questions, insecurities, seeking guidance. Lately, those calls had stopped. Everything had gone quiet. Too quiet. Over the next few days, they followed through on Robert's plan. They told Adam and Jessica that recovery would take weeks. Robert exaggerated the pain in his leg. Emily kept her wrist wrapped, even though the swelling had gone down. The two of them leaned on each other, literally and otherwise. They didn't reach out much. Instead, they waited to see who would call. And what they would say. 2 days later, Adam stopped by with takeout and a laptop. He sat in the kitchen while Emily picked at her food and Robert remained in the recliner with his leg elevated. "I figured I'd catch up on some emails while I'm here," Adam said, voice casual. "No sense wasting time." Emily nodded absently. "How's the office?" He hesitated. "Busy. Things are a little complicated." Robert's eyes didn't leave the television, but Emily could feel his attention sharpen. "Complicated how?" she asked. "Just the usual. Some accounts are late. We're reevaluating a few assets." Emily's gaze dropped to the screen of Adam's laptop. Spreadsheets. Numbers. Nothing suspicious at a glance, but then again, nothing ever was. That night, after Adam left, Emily found herself pacing the hallway, thinking of Jessica's tone during the hike. The calmness. The calculated distance. She wasn't sure what they were trying to do, but it was becoming clearer that it involved the business, and perhaps more. As she stood near the study, she noticed something on the desk, a stack of unopened bank statements. Robert had stopped checking them daily a few months ago, preferring the online dashboard. But something told her to look. She opened one envelope. Then another. Her stomach twisted. One of the business accounts had been nearly emptied. A transfer. Not unauthorized. But unannounced. The date matched the weekend before their hike. She stood still, heart pounding. The storm wasn't coming. It had already begun. The following morning broke with a cool breeze and a sky mottled with soft gray clouds, a quiet contrast to the turmoil churning inside Emily's chest. She moved slowly through the kitchen, nursing her wrapped wrist while preparing a simple breakfast. Robert sat at the dining table, his injured leg propped up on a stool. He was unusually quiet, and she knew better than to disturb him during these spells of thought. They had lived enough years together for her to recognize when his silence was a shield, protecting something not yet ready to be spoken aloud. On the table beside her, the bank statements she had discovered the night before sat in a neat pile, partially hidden under a magazine. She hadn't confronted Robert with them yet. Something in her hesitated, unsure whether it was fear of what the documents meant or fear of confirming what they both were starting to suspect. Robert broke the silence first. "Adam's coming by again this afternoon." Emily paused, the spoon in her hand hovering over a bowl of oatmeal. "He called? Said he wanted to check in. Maybe talk about the company." She lowered the spoon. "That's sudden." "I think he's testing the water," Robert replied. "Seeing how much we know." Emily glanced toward the living room, where the morning news murmured from the television screen, ignored. She moved to sit beside Robert, careful with her wrist, and lowered her voice. "I read the statements," she said simply. Robert didn't react at first. Then he let out a slow breath, the kind that made his shoulders sag slightly. "I figured you would. Why didn't you tell me?" "I wasn't sure yet what to make of them," he admitted. "I wanted to talk to the bank first." Quietly. Emily felt the sting of being excluded but pushed it aside. The transfer, it was large. Not reckless, but definitely hidden. Robert nodded. That account was supposed to cover quarterly taxes and employee benefits. If it's gone, someone's in trouble. Or desperate, Emily added. Robert gave her a long look. "We need more than paperwork. We need to know what's driving them." Later that day, Adam arrived, alone. He carried a laptop bag and a box of pastries from a nearby bakery, which he set on the counter with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and his hair uncombed, a rare break from his usually polished appearance. "I figured you two could use something sweet," he said. Emily thanked him politely while Robert gestured toward the armchair across from him. "How's work?" Robert asked, eyes narrowing slightly. Adam hesitated. "Busy. I'm handling most things on my own now. Jessica's helping where she can, but she's not much for accounting." "And why is that?" Robert asked. Adam shifted in his seat. "Because we're changing a few things." Emily leaned forward, careful not to appear too eager. "Such as?" "The structure. We're merging two smaller departments to streamline operations. We're also evaluating some of the property holdings. Maintenance costs have increased, and not everything's giving us a return anymore." "Sounds like decisions made in a hurry," Robert remarked. Adam didn't reply immediately. Instead, He opened his laptop and turned it toward them. On the screen were charts and tables, some with red markers and urgent labels. He pointed at a bar graph showing a decline in quarterly profits. "We've been running leaner and leaner each year," Adam said. "And frankly, the old ways aren't working anymore. If we keep doing things the same way, we'll fold within a year or two." Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "You should have talked to us." Adam's eyes met hers, hard and tired. "I didn't want to worry you. You've both been through enough." "That's not your decision to make," Robert said quietly. "We built this business with transparency and trust. If you're changing that now, you're not just changing strategy, you're changing its foundation." Adam looked away. As the conversation faded, Emily noticed something else, a momentary flicker in Adam's expression. A flash of guilt, or perhaps regret, when Robert mentioned trust. She couldn't tell what it meant, but it lingered like a shadow over the rest of his visit. That evening, while Robert dozed in his chair, Emily stood at the window and watched the twilight settle over their quiet neighborhood. Her mind replayed the visit in fragments. Adam's tone. His evasions. The numbers on the screen. She knew her son, knew how he deflected when pressured. And something about the way he spoke reminded her of a teenager covering up a broken window with an elaborate story. Later that night, a soft buzz on her phone broke her thoughts. It was a text message, from Jessica. "Can we talk sometime? Just you and me. In private." Emily stared at the message. It was unexpected. Jessica had never reached out to her alone, certainly not like this. She typed a reply with care. "Tomorrow afternoon. Here." The following day, Jessica arrived at exactly 3 o'clock. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and she wore a dark blue blazer over jeans, half formal, half casual. She carried no purse, no laptop, no props to lean on. Emily led her to the sunroom, where the afternoon light poured through the windows and softened the tension between them. They sat opposite each other, the low table between them bare except for 2 glasses of water. "I appreciate you making time," Jessica began, her tone clipped but sincere. Emily nodded. "What did you want to talk about?" Jessica glanced toward the hallway, as if to make sure they were alone. "About Adam. About what's been happening." Emily leaned back, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm listening." Jessica looked away for a moment before speaking. "The business, it's more than just struggling. There's debt. Serious debt. Some of it tied to expansion efforts that never took off. Adam didn't want you to know because he was trying to fix it quietly. But things are getting worse." "Why now?" Emily asked. "Why reach out now?" "Because I don't agree with what he's planning next," Jessica said. "He's considering selling off key assets, some that have your names on them. He thinks it's the only way out." Emily's breath caught. "Without telling us?" Jessica nodded. "He's afraid. Of failing you. Of losing everything. And he doesn't trust that you'll let him make the hard choices." Emily's voice was quiet. "He's not entirely wrong. I tried to talk him out of it," Jessica added. "But he won't listen to me anymore. I thought you should know." Emily sat in silence, absorbing the weight of the words. She had expected complications, maybe even secrets, but this was something else. Desperation wrapped in good intentions, hidden behind actions that could destroy everything they had built. Jessica stood. "I'll deny I said any of this if Adam asks. But I couldn't keep pretending." As she left, Emily remained in the sunroom, alone again with the fading light and a heart full of questions. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but what they formed was still unclear. Only one thing was certain now: the time for pretending was ending. Soon, they would need to act. The day after Jessica's unexpected visit, Emily shared the conversation with Robert. She relayed every detail: the tone, the choice of words, the subtle tension in Jessica's eyes. He listened without interruption, his jaw tightening slightly with each sentence. When she finished, he remained quiet for a long time, staring out the living room window where the early autumn leaves had begun to drift onto the lawn. "She knows more than she's saying," he said finally. Emily nodded. "She said she'd deny it if Adam found out. That tells me she's not just worried, she's afraid of where this is heading." Robert reached for the cane leaning against the side of his recliner. His leg was healing faster than either of them had let on, but he still moved as though he were injured. The deception had become a necessary tool, one they wielded with increasing precision. There was no guilt, only resolve. Later that afternoon, they received a phone call from their family physician's office. Robert had asked for an independent consultation on some of the company's insurance records, using the pretense of a billing confusion. What he received instead was a quiet confirmation that their personal policies had been altered 2 weeks ago, without their direct approval. The company's board had approved a restructuring that shifted all legacy insurance obligations to a secondary account. One that, coincidentally, had been drained. Emily felt her heart sink as she listened to the clinical voice on the other end of the line. "We're reviewing whether the changes are valid," the caller said. "But if you have any concerns, you may want to consult legal counsel." She thanked the caller and hung up, then turned to Robert, who had heard enough of the conversation to know what had been said. "They're covering their tracks," she said. "Or trying to." Robert's fingers tapped slowly against the arm of the chair. "Which means they're preparing for something permanent." Emily didn't want to speak the word that came to her mind, sale. Not yet. But it hovered there, unspoken, between them. The next morning brought rain. Thin gray streaks slid down the windows, and the sky hung low, muting the colors of the trees and casting a somber hue over the house. Emily moved through the day slowly, sorting through old documents in her home office. She needed to see for herself what had changed, what was missing, what had been erased without consent. Buried beneath a stack of annual reports, she found a file from 5 years earlier, a written agreement that detailed ownership shares between the family members. It clearly stated that any sale of company property required joint approval from both founders, Emily and Robert. And yet, there had been no signatures sought. No conversations initiated. Later that afternoon, Robert received a call from an old colleague, Harold Beckman, one of the firm's retired accountants. Harold had been out of the loop for years, but he still had friends inside the company. His voice was quiet, almost apologetic. "I heard some chatter from one of the juniors. There's talk of a private investor stepping in." Robert's grip tightened on the phone. "What kind of investor?" "Out of state. Corporate. Supposedly wants to buy the firm's intellectual assets and client list. Quiet deal. No publicity." Robert didn't speak for a long time. "You didn't hear this from me," Harold said. "No. I didn't." Robert hung up. The silence in the room grew heavy. Emily stepped closer. "What now?" "We confirm it," Robert said. "We find out who's behind the deal. And we stop it before it's too late." That night, they drafted a plan. Emily would reach out to a trusted friend, Miriam Collier, who had once served as the firm's administrative manager before retiring. Miriam was meticulous, discreet, and fiercely loyal to Robert and Emily. If anyone could dig through internal emails and schedules without raising suspicion, it was her. The next day, under the guise of needing advice on estate planning, Emily invited Miriam to lunch at a quiet cafe downtown. They sat in a back booth, and after a few minutes of small talk, Emily leaned in and lowered her voice. "I need your help." "Off the record." Quietly. Miriam's eyes sharpened. "Of course." Emily explained what she could, without speculation, without accusation. Only facts. Bank transfers, insurance changes, the unauthorized restructuring. Miriam listened with furrowed brows, her fingers tightening around the handle of her coffee mug. "I'll see what I can find," she said. "No promises. But if there's something happening in the background, I'll know." The next 48 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Emily busied herself with the pretense of recovery, still wearing her wrist brace and moving cautiously through each interaction. Robert maintained the same, using his cane when anyone else was around, though in private he was walking more steadily by the hour. On the third morning, Miriam called. "I found something," she said. "And you're not going to like it." They met again, this time at Miriam's house. She had printed a series of emails between Adam and a law firm representing a group of investors from Chicago. The emails weren't explicit, but the pattern was clear: preliminary negotiations, valuation assessments, and requests for due diligence documents. The timeline dated back more than 2 months. It had all been conducted through Adam's private email account, forwarded to his work inbox through an automated rule, one only someone with backdoor access would have noticed. One email stood out. It was short, typed late at night. "We can finalize by the end of the quarter. My parents are indisposed. They won't contest the transfer if we move quickly." Emily read the words again and again. Indisposed. That word echoed like a bell struck deep within her ribs. It wasn't just deception. It was strategic omission, crafted and wielded like a weapon. She took the printouts home and laid them on the kitchen table for Robert to read. His face hardened with every line. "We confront him," Emily said. "Tonight." Robert didn't hesitate. That evening, they invited Adam to dinner, just him. No Jessica. Emily told him she had made his favorite roast and that they wanted to talk, nothing serious. He accepted the invitation without suspicion. He arrived a few minutes past 6 o'clock, wearing a warm sweater and a forced smile. He looked tired, older than he had just a week ago. As he sat at the table, Emily served the meal, her hands steady despite the storm inside her. Robert sat beside her, a quiet presence of authority. The meal passed in uncomfortable calm. They spoke about the weather, about a local event in town, and briefly about the business. Adam kept his responses vague, clearly trying to maintain control over the conversation. When the dishes were cleared, Robert leaned forward, his voice firm. "We know, Adam." Their son froze. "Know what?" Emily set the printouts on the table. "This. All of this." Adam's eyes flicked down to the pages. His expression faltered for only a second, then returned to one of tight, rehearsed control. "I was trying to protect you," he said. "By excluding us?" Robert asked. "By lying? I didn't want you to worry. You're not in a place to manage this kind of stress anymore. I thought I could fix it myself." Emily's voice cut in. "By selling everything without telling us? By rewriting our lives behind our backs?" Adam stood, pushing his chair back. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Robert said quietly. "You made yours." Adam looked down, breathing heavily. "What now?" "That depends on you," Emily said. "You tell us everything. Every detail. Or we take this to the board and contest every step you've taken." Adam hesitated, then slowly nodded. "I'll explain. Everything." But Emily knew, this was only the beginning. The truth was coming out, piece by piece. And they would be ready for every last shard of it. The morning after the confrontation, the house was unusually quiet. Emily sat at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she had barely touched. Outside, the golden leaves drifted silently from the trees, covering the lawn like a quiet surrender. Robert had gone out early for a short walk, partly to stretch his healing leg, partly to clear his mind. Neither of them had slept much. The weight of the previous night lingered between them, unanswered questions filling the air. Adam's promise to explain everything had been vague. After the confrontation, he had sat back down and muttered a few fragments, something about a series of bad investments, a promise from an investor that had fallen through, a rushed attempt to recover losses. But he hadn't stayed long. He'd left shortly after, citing exhaustion and the need to gather the full picture. It was a deflection, and they both knew it. Emily finished her coffee and made her way to the study. The room still carried the scent of old paper and cedar shelves. Robert had kept meticulous records of the company's early years, binders filled with notes, original contracts, meeting minutes, and handwritten projections from a time when dreams had been bigger than the budget. She pulled one of the older folders from the cabinet and set it on the desk. As she flipped through the pages, she found herself drawn to the patterns. Back then, every move had been carefully considered. Conservative. Stable. But something had shifted in recent years. The decisions became bolder, almost reckless. Emily remembered one particular expansion that had made her uneasy at the time, the purchase of a downtown building for client-facing operations. Adam had pushed for it, calling it a necessary step for modernization. Jessica had supported him. Robert had been cautious, but eventually relented. Now, that same building was flagged in the documents as one of the assets under evaluation for liquidation. Emily opened her laptop and logged into the company's internal platform using her still-active access credentials. She hadn't used the portal in over a year, having stepped back officially after her 70th birthday. But she had never closed the account. She navigated through the financial reports and project logs, noting the frequency of Adam's involvement in major decisions. Jessica's name also appeared on several consultation notes, always tagged as External Strategy Advisor. Then, something caught her eye. A series of entries labeled as Special Executive Meetings had been logged over the past 6 months. These meetings had no official agendas, no minutes attached. Just timestamps and initials, AR and JR. Emily frowned. JR could only mean Jessica Riley, Jessica's maiden name. Why would she be logging meetings under her old surname? She clicked deeper, accessing restricted notes through a backdoor Robert had taught her years ago, a small administrative loophole neither of them had ever closed. One of the notes contained a short line. Review of parental voting override protocol, pending legal consultation. She stared at the screen, her pulse ticking in her ears. Override protocol? Emily called Robert, who was still walking near the neighborhood lake. "There's more," she said. "Come home. We need to talk." He returned within 20 minutes, breathing heavily, a slight limp in his step. She met him at the door and led him straight to the study. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the screen. He read the note, his brow furrowing. "That wasn't supposed to exist. We removed override options from the bylaws years ago. Then they've tried to reinstate them." Robert turned and looked at her. "If they succeed, they can sell everything. Even our shares." They stared at each other, the air between them growing colder. The idea of Adam orchestrating a legal workaround to silence their votes was more than betrayal. It was a calculated move to seize control. "We need someone inside," Robert said. "Someone we can trust." Emily nodded. "What about Claire?" Claire Jennings had worked in the company's legal department for over 15 years. She had always been respectful to both Robert and Emily, even after the transition to Adam's leadership. Emily remembered her as thoughtful, diligent, and quietly loyal. She also remembered that Claire had reached out a few months ago, asking Emily if she'd consider joining the board meetings again, even just as an advisor. At the time, Emily had politely declined. Now, she regretted it. She picked up her phone and called the number saved under Claire's name. The line rang twice. "Claire Jennings," came the familiar voice. "Claire, it's Emily. I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Mrs. Halden. How are you?" Emily didn't waste time. "I need to speak with you. Privately. About something inside the company." There was a pause. Then, "Of course. I can come by this evening, after work." "Thank you, Claire." "Truly." That evening, Claire arrived promptly at 6:30. She wore a dark green coat over her business attire, and her face bore the calm professionalism that had always defined her. Emily led her into the study, where Robert was waiting. They explained everything, carefully, methodically. Claire listened intently, occasionally nodding, her lips pressed into a thoughtful line. When they finished, she folded her hands in her lap. "I'm not surprised," she said softly. "I've seen signs." quiet changes in authorization protocols. Sudden shifts in policy drafts. But no one talks about it openly. It's all very subtle. Do you know about the override protocol? Robert asked. Claire hesitated. There's been chatter. A proposal floated by Jessica, not Adam, at first. She suggested it during a strategy meeting, but it wasn't formalized. Not yet. She used her maiden name, Emily said. Yes. That's her pattern when she doesn't want something traced directly. Robert leaned forward. Can you access internal memos? Meeting notes? Claire nodded slowly. Yes. I can. But if I'm caught, I lose everything. You won't be, Emily said. We're not asking you to expose anyone. Just tell us what's happening, what's already in motion. Claire agreed to investigate quietly. She would go through archived communications, check for updates on legal consultations, and report back within a few days. As she left that night, Emily walked her to the door. I know we're asking a lot, she said. Claire offered a gentle smile. I believe in what you built. And I don't like what they're turning it into. After she left, Emily returned to the study. Robert was still at the desk, reviewing the list of assets flagged for sale. There's something else I've been thinking about, he said. Emily raised an eyebrow. You remember that retreat Adam and Jessica took last summer? The one where they disconnected for a week? Yes. In Oregon. He used the company card for that trip. Emily blinked. Why would he? Robert looked up. Because they weren't alone. I checked the receipts when they returned. 2 additional rooms. Restaurant bills for 4. You think they met with the investors then? I do. I think the deal was in motion long before the numbers started dropping. Emily sat down beside him, the pieces forming a clearer image. They had been blind to it for too long, distracted by politeness, misled by partial truths. But now, they had names, dates, and allies. The web was unraveling, and they were finally pulling the right threads. Whatever Adam and Jessica were planning, it was no longer hidden. It was exposed. And that meant it could be stopped. 3 days passed without a word from Claire. Emily kept herself busy during the daylight hours, walking around the neighborhood with a slight limp for appearances, maintaining the image of a woman still recovering. Robert did the same. But every evening, when the sun dipped below the hills and the house grew quiet, both of them found themselves staring at the door, waiting for a knock that did not come. On the 4th morning, Claire finally called. I can't talk over the phone, she said. Meet me at the cafe on Mill Street. 10 o'clock. Emily arrived 10 minutes early and found a quiet table near the back. The cafe was warm, with the comforting smell of fresh pastries and coffee drifting through the air, but she could not relax. Not yet. Claire appeared just after 10, her coat damp from a light rain, her face tense with fatigue. They ordered tea and sat in silence until the drinks arrived. Only then did Claire speak. I found the memo, she said. It was buried inside a budget proposal draft, one Jessica prepared. It outlines a provisional shareholder override structure. It would allow the board, under emergency financial distress, to temporarily neutralize founder-level voting rights to expedite recovery measures. Emily blinked slowly. And the board signed it? Claire shook her head. Not yet. It's still being reviewed by legal. But it's close. If no one contests it within the next 7 business days, it automatically goes into effect. Emily's hand tightened around her teacup. And the board members? 3 of them are neutral. 2 are leaning toward Adam. 1 is already in his pocket, Gregory Timmons. You remember him? Emily did. Timmons had joined the board 3 years earlier, an affable but ambitious man who always seemed to overpromise and underdeliver. They'll wait until the last possible day, Claire continued. That's Jessica's strategy. Minimize attention. Let it pass by attrition. Emily nodded. Thank you, Claire. I don't know what we would have done without you. Claire lowered her voice. There's more. I think they're trying to sell the intellectual property, client data, proprietary systems, even Robert's early blueprints. If the override is approved, they'll sign with the Chicago firm within 2 weeks. After that, you won't be able to stop them. Emily took a breath, steadying herself. Then we don't wait. She returned home with the full weight of Claire's findings pressing down on her chest. As she stepped inside, Robert looked up from the living room. Well? She handed him a small folder Claire had prepared, printouts, notes, a copy of the proposal draft. He read in silence for several minutes, his eyes narrowing. When he finished, he closed the folder slowly. They want to gut the company and walk away with the pieces. Emily nodded. And they've built just enough support to get away with it. Robert pushed himself to his feet. Not if we move fast. Together, they outlined their next steps. First, they would call an emergency meeting with the board, not a formal challenge, but a review session under the company's legacy rights, which still allowed founders to request information on critical policy changes. That would force the proposal into open discussion. Next, they would contact the neutral board members individually. Emily would reach out to Marianne Chong, a sharp-minded former CEO with a no-nonsense reputation. Robert would call Thomas Granger, a conservative investor known for his loyalty to the company's founding vision. The third, Elias Ford, would be the hardest. He was new, and they barely knew him. But they would try. Emily called Marianne first. The woman picked up on the second ring. Emily Halden, Marianne said, her tone curious. I didn't expect to hear from you. I need to talk to you about a proposal under review, Emily replied. One that could change the way this company is governed. Marianne was silent for a moment. I'm listening. Over the next 10 minutes, Emily explained everything. The hidden restructuring, the override clause, the pending sale. Marianne asked precise questions, interrupting only to verify details. When Emily finished, Marianne said, I hadn't seen the full picture. But I'm glad you called. I'll hold my vote until I see that memo myself. Send me a copy. I'll do it today. Thank you. And Emily? Yes? You built something real. I remember that. I won't let them tear it down without a fight. Robert's conversation with Thomas went similarly. The older man had always respected Robert, even if they didn't always agree. By the time the call ended, Robert had his assurance. Thomas would not vote in favor of anything he hadn't personally reviewed with full transparency. Only Elias remained. He didn't return their messages that day, or the next. On the third day, Robert tracked down his assistant and left a firm but polite request for a meeting. The assistant promised to deliver the message, but no reply came. Meanwhile, Claire continued to monitor internal communication. She reported that Jessica was growing more cautious, reducing her presence in company emails and shifting to private meetings. Adam, by contrast, seemed agitated, his directives increasingly abrupt, his decisions more impulsive. He's losing confidence, Claire said during a brief check-in. He's pushing for the sale faster than before. I think he's afraid you're making moves. He's right, Emily replied. But there was another problem. With the override clause still under legal review, they couldn't prevent Adam and Jessica from initiating informal buyer meetings. And that's exactly what they did. On Friday afternoon, Claire called with an update. They scheduled a private presentation at the Denver office with the Chicago investors. Monday at 10 in the morning. It's not listed publicly, only a handful of executives know. But it's happening. Emily and Robert exchanged a glance across the room. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Then Robert said, "We need to be there." "They won't let you into a private meeting," Claire warned. "No," Robert agreed. "But we can make sure they know we're watching." Emily thought for a moment. "And we can speak to the investors ourselves. Before they're fed the story Jessica and Adam want them to hear." That weekend, Emily reached out to a former client, Elaine Strickland, who now worked as a corporate advisor in Chicago and had contacts in the same investment circles. Elaine agreed to speak with the prospective buyers and arrange a brief meeting on Sunday evening, before the Monday presentation. It would be off the record, no lawyers, just a conversation over dinner. They don't want bad publicity, Elaine said. If they think there's a risk of founder opposition or legal challenge, they might back out. Sunday evening, Emily and Robert sat across from two executives from the Chicago firm, both men in tailored suits, polite but wary. Over dinner, Emily spoke first, calm and direct. "We're not here to fight. We just want you to know what you're walking into." She explained the override clause, the hidden restructuring, the financial instability, and the fact that the current owners, herself and Robert, had never approved the sale. She handed over documents Claire had prepared, including copies of the original bylaws and the latest proposal draft. "We're not trying to stop progress," Robert added. "But we're not going to stand by and let our company be dismantled without consent." The executives listened carefully. They asked few questions but took notes and exchanged subtle glances. By the time dessert arrived, one of them finally spoke. "We appreciate the transparency. This changes some of what we've been told." The other added, "If the internal governance isn't secure, we won't proceed. We'll need to reevaluate." Emily met his gaze. "That's all we ask." As they left the restaurant, Robert offered his arm, and Emily took it, walking quietly under the dim streetlights. "One step closer," she whispered. "Yes," Robert replied. "But we're not finished yet." Monday morning arrived with a brittle chill in the air. A thin layer of frost glazed the lawn outside, glimmering faintly in the pale dawn light. Emily was up early, seated at the dining table with a stack of papers, 2 cups of coffee, and an envelope addressed to Claire. Robert joined her soon after, rubbing his shoulder and murmuring something about the cold settling into his bones. He didn't need to say it out loud, both of them knew it wasn't just the weather that weighed on them this morning. The Chicago investors would be walking into the Denver office in just a few hours. They had left their meeting the night before with calm expressions and a neutral goodbye, but Emily had seen enough boardrooms in her life to know when something had been shaken loose behind a composed exterior. They had planted a seed of doubt, and now they had to wait and see if it took root. Around 8:30, Emily sent the documents to Claire via courier, copies of the founders' agreement, the original bylaws, and the private message Emily had written specifically for the legal review team, urging a delay of the vote and requesting formal clarification of the override clause's legitimacy. Claire confirmed she had received the package and would make sure the right eyes saw it before the day was over. At 10 minutes to 9, Adam called. Emily glanced at Robert, then answered. "Hello, Adam." There was a pause, then his voice came through the line, tight, measured. "We're starting the meeting in a few minutes. I thought you should know." Emily's voice remained calm. "We're aware. I meant what I said the other night," he added quickly. "I'm doing this because I thought it was the only way. I know you don't believe that, but—" "I believe you're doing what you think is necessary," Emily interrupted. "But that doesn't mean it's right." Another pause. "I hope this goes smoothly," he said, but there was little confidence in his voice. Emily didn't reply. She simply ended the call and set the phone down, her fingers lingering against the table's edge. Robert looked at her with a raised brow. "He's unraveling," she said. "I don't think he knows what happens next." By mid-afternoon, Claire called with an update. The internal meeting had gone ahead as scheduled, but the investors had limited their participation to listening. No agreements were signed. No commitments were made. And, more importantly, one of the legal advisors present had raised a question about the override clause's enforceability, citing language from the founders' bylaws Claire had submitted that morning. "They're pulling back," Claire said. "But Jessica's not. She's already scheduled a follow-up with the legal team for Friday. She's pushing hard." "Then we push harder," Emily replied. That evening, Robert attempted to contact Elias Ford again, the elusive board member they had failed to reach the week before. This time, he answered. His voice was curt but not dismissive. I've received the documents, he said. I'm still reviewing them. I'd like to meet, Robert said. One conversation. That's all I ask. Elias hesitated. Fine. Tomorrow morning. 7:30. Delaney's Cafe, near the East Office. Robert agreed, and the line went dead. The next morning, dressed in one of his older suits and walking without his cane for the first time in weeks, Robert arrived at the cafe a few minutes early. Elias was already there, seated near the window, reviewing something on a tablet. He looked younger than Robert remembered, probably late 30s, with the sharp-eyed efficiency of someone who had risen quickly in his field. They exchanged greetings, and Robert sat down across from him. I appreciate you making the time, Robert said. Elias nodded but did not look up. You wanted a conversation. Let's have it. Robert kept his voice steady. You've seen the proposal. And you've seen the founder's charter. The clause in question was buried in a legal draft, introduced without transparency, and depends entirely on the board's silence. That's not governance. That's manipulation. Elias glanced at him. You're assuming intent. No. I'm recognizing pattern. There's a difference. Finally, Elias set the tablet down. I'm new to this board, Mr. Holden. I wasn't part of the history you and your wife built. I came in because the firm's reputation was strong and the mission was sound. Now I'm being told the company is under duress, and drastic measures are needed to preserve it. Robert leaned forward slightly. Drastic measures aren't the problem. Hiding them is. Elias didn't reply immediately. Then he said, I haven't voted yet. And I won't until I know the full scope. But understand this, I'm not sentimental. I won't vote based on legacy. I'm not asking you to, Robert replied. I'm asking you to vote based on truth. They shook hands before parting, and Robert left the cafe with no promises, but with the quiet hope that perhaps one more pillar of support had shifted. Meanwhile, Emily decided to take a different approach. That afternoon, she arranged to meet Jessica, not at a neutral location, but at the house. She invited her under the pretense of needing help with some estate planning details, a subject Jessica had always found interesting. Jessica arrived at 4:30. She was sharply dressed, as always, but her posture carried a tension that hadn't been there before. She accepted a cup of tea, but didn't sip it. Thank you for coming, Emily said, sitting across from her in the sunroom. Jessica nodded. You said it was about planning? Emily smiled faintly. In a way. But what I really want is a conversation. Jessica's eyes narrowed. About? Emily didn't hesitate. About honesty. About the truth. About what you're doing to this family. Jessica didn't flinch. This isn't about family. It's about survival. You made it about family when you helped Adam draft a clause to override our votes. Jessica set the cup down. You're twisting the facts. Then untwist them, Emily said calmly. Help me understand. For a moment, Jessica said nothing. Then, finally, she sighed. Adam didn't want to do it this way. He really didn't. But the numbers were worse than we let on. We've been operating at a loss for over a year. There were 2 quarters where we used deferred payments just to stay afloat. The Chicago offer was the only one that would cover our outstanding obligations and still leave enough to restructure. Emily's voice remained steady. Then you should have come to us. Not gone around us. Jessica looked away. We thought you'd shut it down without even hearing it. You didn't give us the chance. Jessica stood, gathering her coat. It's too late to unravel this, Emily. Even if the sale doesn't go through, the company won't survive another year without drastic change. As she walked to the door, Emily followed her. Then work with us, Emily said. Not behind us. We're not the enemy. Jessica paused, one hand on the doorknob. I'll think about it. When she was gone, Emily stood in the entryway, the sound of the doors closing echoing in her ears. The fight wasn't over. The decisions hadn't yet been made. But the lines were clearer now: who stood where, and why. Robert returned later that evening and relayed the conversation with Elias. Emily listened, then shared her own. "We may have a chance," she said softly. "Yes," Robert agreed. "But we need a plan. A real one." They sat together in the living room, the fire crackling softly, two people who had built a life together now working to protect what remained of their legacy. Tomorrow, they would begin building that plan. And this time, they would not be silent. The following day, Emily stood in front of the full-length mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the scarf around her neck with quiet determination. Her wrist brace was off now, her arm had healed days ago, but she chose to wear it anyway. It was a visual reminder of what had started all of this. Robert entered the room behind her, already dressed in one of his older suits, pressed and clean, though a little tighter than it had been in its prime. He moved without the cane now, his posture stronger than it had been in weeks. They had dropped the act in private, but in public, the illusion of fragility remained a shield, one they still found useful. "You're sure you want to do this?" Robert asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror beside her. Emily turned to face him. "Yes. If we want the truth, we go to the place where it's buried." At precisely 9:30, they stepped into the familiar lobby of their former office building. The polished tile, the soft hum of fluorescent lights, and the faint scent of paper and printer toner greeted them like old acquaintances. A few passing employees offered polite greetings, some surprised to see them, others too young to have ever worked under their leadership. Emily smiled and nodded, offering no explanations. Claire met them near the elevators, her expression serious but composed. She was holding a folder close to her chest and gestured for them to follow her. "I've reserved a small conference room on the 3rd floor," she whispered. "It's between meetings, and no one should disturb us for at least an hour." They followed her up, past rows of cubicles and quiet offices, into a modest corner room with glass walls and a view of the city skyline. Claire locked the door behind them and lowered the blinds before placing the folder on the table. "I found what you were looking for," she said. "It's not formalized yet, but it's clearly being prepared." She opened the folder and spread out several printed documents, internal memos, draft contracts, digital receipts. At the top of the pile was an internal email marked, "Preliminary Transfer Packet, for legal review only." It was addressed to Jessica and copied to Adam. The contents outlined a complete reallocation of intellectual property rights, including customer databases, internal software, and even Robert's original patent filings, prepared as collateral to sweeten the investor deal. Robert reached for the document, his fingers tightening as he read. "This was never supposed to be negotiable." Claire nodded. "They've repackaged it under a new asset category, legacy contributions. It separates them from the company's operating assets, making them easier to sell independently." Emily's jaw tightened. "So not only are they selling the company, they're dismantling it piece by piece to make it more appealing." "There's more," Claire said, pulling out a second packet. "This is a transfer request form. It hasn't been signed, but it's been routed through the internal review system. It lists Adam as sole authorized representative." Emily stared at the line under "Founder's Approval." It was blank. "They didn't even try to forge it," she said softly. "They just left it out." "That's the strategy," Claire said. "If no one challenges it, it moves forward by silence." Robert looked up. "And the board?" "Still undecided. Elias has gone quiet again, but Marianne is holding firm. Granger too. Timmons is pushing for a vote this week. He's trying to corner the neutral parties while momentum is on his side." Emily sat back, absorbing the weight of the documents. "We need leverage. Something stronger than opinion or legacy. We need undeniable proof that this is being manipulated for personal gain." Claire hesitated, then pulled out a flash drive from her jacket pocket. "I probably shouldn't have this," she said, "but I found a folder in Jessica's cloud archive. She must have synced her work account at some point. Inside, there were audio files, recordings from planning sessions. Mostly harmless strategy talk. But one of them. She handed the flash drive to Emily. It's a conversation between Adam and Jessica. From about 6 weeks ago. They're discussing how to push the override through without board resistance. Emily held the drive in her hand, her fingers curling around it. Does it name names? Robert asked. Yes, Claire said. And it confirms that Jessica advised Adam not to share financial details with you. She says, word for word, they'll panic. They'll block us before we even explain why we're doing it. Emily met Robert's eyes. That's coercion. Deliberate exclusion. It's worse, Robert replied. It's proof of intent. Claire glanced at the clock. We should go. I already delayed my next meeting to make time for this. They left the room quietly, the flash drive hidden safely in Emily's purse. As they walked back toward the elevators, Robert placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. You've done more than we ever could have asked. She smiled faintly. This company mattered to me too. It still does. Outside, the sky had shifted from gray to a soft blue, the clouds retreating toward the foothills. Emily and Robert stood near their car for a moment, neither eager to speak. Finally, Robert said, we call a meeting. Tonight. Emily nodded. With the board? No, he said. With Adam. That evening, after dinner, Emily sent a short message to Adam asking him to come by. No reason given, no tone of confrontation. Just a simple request from his mother. He replied 5 minutes later. Sure. I'll be there at 8. Robert prepared the living room, setting out 3 chairs and placing a small audio recorder on the table between them. Not hidden. Not a secret. It would sit there as a quiet warning that this conversation would not be casual. At exactly 8 o'clock, Adam arrived. He stepped into the house, looked around with slight hesitation, and raised an eyebrow when he saw the arrangement in the living room. What's this? Sit down, Robert said. Adam frowned. Why the formality? Because we're not talking as a family tonight, Emily replied. We're talking as shareholders. As founders. And as people who have been systematically cut out of decisions that affect everything we built. Adam glanced at the recorder but didn't object. He sat, his posture tense. We know about the override clause, Robert began. We know about the asset transfer. We know you've positioned yourself as sole representative. And we know Jessica has advised you to keep us in the dark. Adam opened his mouth to respond, but Emily held up her hand. We also have a recording. A conversation between you and Jessica. If we bring it to the board, they'll hear everything. For a moment, Adam looked genuinely stunned. Then his shoulders sagged. I didn't want it to be like this, he said. But you let it happen, Robert replied. Adam rubbed his face with both hands. I didn't know what else to do. The company is bleeding. The board wants action. Jessica was the only one with a plan. Emily's voice was quieter now. And instead of coming to us, you let fear dictate your choices. I thought you wouldn't understand. We understand better than you think, Robert said. But we would never have approved a sale built on lies. Adam looked down. What happens now? You have 24 hours, Emily said. To issue a formal request to the board to pause all pending actions. You tell them a review is underway. That internal disagreements among leadership require clarity before any decisions can be made. And if I don't? Then we release the recording, Robert said. And we bring legal action against every name tied to the override draft. Adam was silent for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. I'll do it. Good, Emily said. Then maybe we can still fix this. As he left that night, the weight of consequences trailing behind him, Emily sat beside Robert on the couch, the firelight casting soft shadows across their faces. We're close, she said. Robert nodded. But it's still fragile. Yes, Emily whispered. But for the first time in weeks, I feel like we're holding the pieces. The next morning, Emily woke to find a message from Adam sitting quietly in her inbox. The subject line read, "Board request sent." She opened it with measured breath, reading through his formal notification to the company's board, a request to pause all restructuring, override implementations, and external negotiations pending a full review of internal governance procedures. It was a standard message, terse, professional, but there was something else attached. A note, written separately, only for her. "I'll come by this afternoon. I think it's time you knew everything." She set the laptop aside and looked out the window. The autumn wind had scattered leaves across the yard overnight, swirling them in little golden drifts against the porch steps. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she imagined how the house must have looked 20 years ago, when Adam was still in college and came home for Thanksgiving, full of ideas and ambition. So much had changed. Yet, today, for the first time in weeks, she sensed something shifting again, this time in a direction she didn't dread. By noon, Robert had returned from his physiotherapy session. Though the appointment had been mostly for show, he insisted on attending every week, both to maintain appearances and to stay active. Emily met him at the door, holding up the printed email. He sent the request. Robert read it quickly, then nodded. "So the fire's out, for now. He's coming over." Robert raised an eyebrow. "Voluntarily?" Emily allowed herself the faintest smile. "Yes. And he says he wants to talk." They spent the rest of the day in a kind of quiet anticipation, not tense, but still. Emily prepared a light meal, mostly untouched when Adam arrived at 4 o'clock. He looked different, tired, yes, but also unburdened. There was something more open in the way he carried himself, as if the weight of pretending had finally exhausted him. They sat in the den this time, not the living room. The den was smaller, cozier, filled with old photographs and a few of Robert's model ships on the shelves. It felt less like a courtroom and more like a place for difficult honesty. Adam didn't waste time. "I know what you think," he began. "And you're not wrong." Robert sat across from him, arms folded but relaxed. Emily remained beside her son, closer than she'd allowed herself to be in weeks. "I was afraid," Adam said, voice low. "Not of failure, at least, not just that. I was afraid of what it would mean if I admitted that I couldn't hold it all together. That I took something you built with your lives and let it slip through my fingers." He glanced between them. "I tried everything. Loans, partnerships, temporary cuts. Jessica was the one who finally said we needed to act or lose everything. She believed we could reinvent the company if we trimmed the fat, made it lean, modern, unrecognizable. But I didn't want to destroy what was left of your legacy. I really didn't." Emily watched him carefully. "Then why didn't you say anything sooner?" Adam looked down, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "Because once I started hiding things, it became easier to keep hiding. The deeper the losses got, the harder it was to imagine explaining them. And Jessica, she pushed hard. She's practical, always has been. To her, this was just a necessary shift. Clean slate. She doesn't carry the history I do." Robert let out a breath. "So you listened to her instead of us?" Adam nodded slowly. "I did. And you let her write us out of our own company," Robert continued. "Out of fear?" "I thought you'd block everything," Adam said. "That you try to hold on to the old ways, even if it meant dragging the company down with them." Emily interrupted before Robert could respond. "You should have trusted that we would have listened." Adam looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something raw behind his eyes. "I wanted to. But by the time I realized how far gone things were, it didn't feel like a conversation anymore. It felt like confession." Silence settled over the room for a few moments. Then Emily reached for a folder on the side table and handed it to Adam. "These are the remaining assets that haven't been entangled in your sale attempts. They're still protected under the old structure, thanks to Claire, who flagged them before they could be folded into the override clause. Adam opened the folder and scanned the contents. He recognized the names. Smaller properties, licensing contracts, 2 regional service agreements, all still intact. Emily continued, "You still have a way out. One that doesn't involve selling the soul of the company." Adam looked up. "What are you suggesting?" Robert finally stood and walked to the window. "You turn the company over," he said simply. Adam blinked. "To whom?" "To us," Robert replied. "Temporarily. You step down from operational leadership. We take charge of restructuring. Not to punish you. To stabilize what's left and rebuild trust, internally and with the board." Adam's expression darkened with a mixture of doubt and guilt. "And Jessica?" Emily was firm. "She has no stake in this if she's not willing to support transparency. We're not pushing her out, but we won't keep her in the room if she won't be honest." Adam exhaled sharply, leaning forward. "You think the board will go for that?" "They already trust us more than you realize," Robert said. "The only reason they haven't voted against you yet is because they've been waiting to see if you'd own your mistakes." Emily added, "This is that moment." Adam closed the folder and nodded slowly. "All right. I'll announce a temporary leave of absence. You two can rejoin the board under executive advisement. Claire can draft the statement." Robert nodded. "It'll work." Adam rose to leave but paused in the doorway. "There's one more thing," he said. "That offer from the Chicago firm? It wasn't entirely selfish." Emily looked up. "They approached us, Jessica and me, because they'd heard we were struggling. One of them used to work with a client we lost years ago. They didn't just want our systems or our client list. They wanted to buy the entire framework and rebuild it under their brand. They didn't plan to keep the name." Robert's face tightened. "Of course not. They never do." Adam nodded. "It would have erased everything. And deep down, I think I knew that." Emily stood and walked to him. She didn't reach out, she wasn't quite there yet, but her voice softened. "You're still our son. We want you to be proud of what you've done. But not at the cost of who you are." He gave her a grateful look, one touched by humility. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For not giving up on me." After he left, Emily and Robert sat in silence, processing what had just unfolded. "He's not a villain," Emily said finally. "No," Robert agreed. "Just a man who got lost under the weight of expectations." They looked at each other, the air between them clearer than it had been in weeks. The battle wasn't over. The company still needed saving. But the fracture between parent and child had begun to heal, not with anger or blame, but with the simple, difficult decision to speak truth aloud. And that, perhaps, was the most human part of all. By the time Wednesday rolled around, the air had changed, colder, heavier, as though the season itself were echoing the shift in their lives. Emily stood at the kitchen counter with a pen and notepad, scribbling bullet points and crossing them out almost as quickly. She wasn't preparing a speech exactly, but she was forming something: structure, rhythm, words that could cut through the fog that had blanketed the last few weeks. Across from her, Robert sat quietly with a printed version of the company's bylaws spread across the table. A red pen rested beside him. Every few minutes, he underlined a line or added a note in the margins. They had spent the better part of the previous evening outlining a plan for the board, not just to stop the override clause or delay any sales, but to recenter the company around something it had lost: transparency, values, continuity. "You're sure we should do this together?" Emily asked, still reviewing her notes. Robert looked up. "We started it together. We rebuild it the same way." Claire had already cleared a spot on the board's agenda. A special meeting had been scheduled for Thursday evening, but before that could happen, Emily and Robert knew one more confrontation had to take place. Not with Adam, he had stepped back, at least for now, but with Jessica. Since their last conversation, she had remained distant, communicating only through brief messages about scheduling, logistics, or minor updates. There had been no acknowledgement of the fallout, no apology, no admission. She wasn't actively interfering anymore, but silence had become her shield. Emily decided it was time to break it. That afternoon, she sent Jessica a message asking her to come by the house. No pretense this time. No vague invitation. The message was direct. You and I need to talk. Face to face. Today, if possible. Jessica replied 15 minutes later. 5 o'clock. At 10 minutes to 5, Emily set the living room in order, not because she cared how it looked, but because the space needed to feel neutral. Comfortable, but not familiar. Honest, but not confrontational. Robert would stay out of it unless called upon. This was Emily's battle to fight. At exactly 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Emily opened it and stepped aside. Jessica entered wearing a beige trench coat, hair pulled back, makeup carefully applied. She looked composed, but there was a new tension behind her eyes, something restrained, perhaps waiting to be released. They sat down across from each other. Emily didn't waste time. I want to talk about what happens next. Jessica tilted her head slightly. I assumed that was already decided. It's not, Emily replied. Not entirely. You've taken a step back, but you haven't said anything about your role in all this. And silence doesn't clear the slate. Jessica crossed her legs, still poised. What do you want me to say? I want you to be honest. With me. With yourself. You orchestrated most of this, maybe not with malice, but certainly without respect for our place in the company. You saw weakness in us, and instead of helping, you leveraged it. Jessica's expression didn't change, but her voice sharpened. You were stepping away. You'd made it clear, no more day-to-day involvement, no interference. We thought we were doing what was necessary. You were wrong, Emily said. You used that distance to cut us out of decisions that we still had the right to participate in. You drafted clauses that violated our agreement. And you coached Adam into silence. That's not leadership. That's manipulation. Jessica's posture shifted slightly, as though her carefully composed surface was starting to crack. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, she said. Then help me understand what you were trying to do, Emily said. Because from where I sit, it looks a lot like you were trying to erase us. Jessica looked down at her hands, fingers laced tightly together. I was trying to protect Adam, she said at last. From the pressure. From the legacy. He wakes up every morning feeling like he has to live up to something he didn't build but was expected to carry forward. He's terrified of disappointing you. And I was terrified that if he failed, you'd never forgive him. Emily softened, but only slightly. Then you should have trusted us to understand that. I didn't, Jessica said, quietly. I didn't trust that you'd let him lead the company into a different future. Emily paused. And what kind of future is that? One where history is discarded? One where the people who built the foundation are considered dead weight? Jessica flinched. I didn't mean it that way. But that's what you did, Emily said. And the board saw it. So did the staff. They saw fear masquerading as strategy. Jessica finally looked up, and for the first time, there was something different in her eyes, regret, perhaps, or something adjacent to it. I'm sorry, she said. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tearful. But it was sincere. Emily nodded slowly. I appreciate that. But sorry isn't enough. Jessica sighed. So what happens now? You step back, Emily said. Not forever. But until the company is stable again. No more planning sessions. No more memos sent under aliases. No more back-channel strategy. Jessica blinked. And what do I tell Adam? You tell him the truth, Emily replied. That you made choices to protect him, and that now you're choosing to protect the company. That doesn't make you weak. That makes you brave. Jessica stood, her composure returning piece by piece. I don't know if I agree with everything you've said, she said. But I do respect you for saying it. She walked to the door, paused, then turned slightly. Good luck tomorrow night. After she left, Robert entered from the hallway, where he had clearly been listening in part. How did it go? She's not our enemy, Emily said. Not anymore. But she's not ready to be our ally either. That's enough, for now, Robert said. They spent the evening reviewing the materials one more time. The pitch for the board was concise: suspend all external negotiations, void the override clause on legal grounds, and install a 6-month transitional leadership team, with Emily and Robert as co-chairs of the governance committee. It wasn't a coup. It was a rescue. The next evening, they entered the boardroom not as guests, but as architects reclaiming the blueprints. The room was full: Marianne, Granger, Elias, Timmons, and the remaining members all present. Claire stood near the back, flanked by a few senior department heads who had quietly voiced their support. Emily opened the session with calm authority. She laid out the facts. The hidden clauses. The circumvention of founder rights. The manipulation of internal processes. And then, she presented the solution, not as punishment, but as restoration. Robert followed, presenting financial scenarios and case studies of similar turnarounds. He spoke not just as a businessman but as someone who knew every line of code, every early client, every hard decision that had brought the company this far. When they finished, the room was silent. Then Marianne spoke. I vote in favor of the proposal. Granger followed. As do I. Timmons hesitated. I still believe change is needed. But not like this. I abstain. Elias looked at them both. You've earned another chance. I vote yes. The remaining members nodded one by one. The motion passed. As Emily and Robert stood together at the head of the table, she glanced over at Claire, who gave a small nod. Later that night, back at home, Emily sat with a blanket over her legs, sipping tea while Robert adjusted the logs in the fireplace. We did it, he said. We started it, she corrected. Now we finish it. But for the first time in what felt like a long while, she believed they actually would. 2 days after the decisive board meeting, the company's internal atmosphere had begun to shift in subtle, but telling ways. Department heads walked the hallways with a new sense of clarity. Claire sent Emily and Robert an updated calendar reflecting the immediate suspension of all sales negotiations. The override clause was officially declared null, and a new email announcement circulated, naming both Robert and Emily as co-chairs of a temporary leadership committee responsible for guiding the firm through its transition period. Still, the air was fragile. Years of momentum in the wrong direction didn't change overnight. There were people in the company who still felt uncertain about the future, about their jobs, and about the true nature of the leadership shuffle. And though Adam had willingly stepped back, he had not yet stepped forward again in any meaningful way. Emily noticed it first when she visited the main office with Robert on a Friday morning. They were there to review quarterly performance data and meet with the finance team. Several employees came by to say hello, some with warm smiles, others with tentative expressions, as if they didn't yet know whether this return was permanent or ceremonial. As they moved through the building, Emily paused near the reception area and noticed a framed photograph of the original founding team. There she was, 25 years younger, standing beside Robert with a wide, hopeful grin. They were surrounded by a small group of determined, tired, but inspired individuals, most of whom had moved on or retired long ago. Robert came to stand beside her. We built this from scratch, she said, almost to herself. And nearly lost it to fear, Robert replied. They continued down the hallway, entering the conference room where the new transition team had already gathered. Claire greeted them with a tight, but optimistic smile, and handed out updated reports. The room was quiet until Emily addressed them. We know this hasn't been easy, she began. But we're here to stabilize, not to control. The next steps won't be about restoring what was, but about preserving what matters and adapting the rest. Her voice carried weight, not from volume, but from presence. As she outlined their plans, streamlined operations, a reassessment of core services, temporary freezes on non-essential hiring and vendor contracts. She also introduced something new, something they had not shared with anyone outside their home. "We've been discussing the possibility of converting the company into a family foundation," she said. "One that supports small businesses and entrepreneurs with training, capital access, and community connections." There was a beat of silence. Even Robert looked at her in surprise. He had heard the idea in passing, but she hadn't mentioned she planned to introduce it today. Claire leaned forward. "Would this mean the company shifts from a for-profit model?" "Partially," Emily explained. "Some divisions would continue as revenue-generating units. Others would become community outreach and training platforms. The foundation structure would provide legal protection for legacy assets and allow for philanthropic investment into small business ecosystems." Robert added, "It's not about dismantling the business. It's about evolving its purpose." One of the younger executives, a woman named Valeria who had only joined the company 18 months prior, raised her hand. "And what would that mean for staff? For roles?" "It wouldn't eliminate positions," Emily said. "It would redefine them. Some employees would be invited to help build the foundation side. Others would continue operating core services. No layoffs are planned. We believe in reform, not rupture." The room grew thoughtful. Pensive. No immediate agreement was voiced, but no one rejected the idea either. After the meeting, as the room emptied, Claire approached Emily. "You've been holding on to that idea, haven't you?" "Since before the override clause was drafted," Emily admitted. "But I knew it wouldn't be heard unless the structure around us was torn down first." Claire smiled. It was worth waiting for. As they left the building that afternoon, Robert turned to her in the car. "That was bold." She chuckled softly. "You didn't seem opposed." "I'm not. I just didn't know you were already halfway to building the next version of this company in your head." "I've had time to think," she said, looking out the window. "And I've had time to let go of the version of this place that was tied to control. What matters now is legacy, not just ours, but the people we built this with, and the ones who'll carry it forward." Later that evening, Adam showed up at the house. He looked unsure, holding a folder in one hand and wearing a casual sweater instead of his usual button-down shirt. He had grown quieter since stepping down, not out of avoidance, but out of space. Emily greeted him warmly, and Robert offered him a seat in the sunroom, where the late-day light filtered through the tall windows. "I heard about the meeting," Adam said. "And about the foundation idea." Emily nodded. "It's not official. But it's something we're preparing." "I read the draft proposal," he continued. "Claire sent it to me, thought I should stay in the loop." "And what did you think?" Robert asked. Adam hesitated, then set the folder down on the coffee table. "I think it's exactly what the company needs." Emily and Robert exchanged glances. "I spent the last few weeks trying to fix something that was broken," Adam continued. "But the problem wasn't just financial. It was philosophical. We didn't know what we were anymore. A consulting firm? A digital platform? A family business with outdated values? I kept thinking if I could just hold it together long enough, I'd figure it out." He looked up. "But you already had." Emily's voice was gentle. "That doesn't mean you failed, Adam. It just means we're stronger when we listen to each other." He nodded slowly. "Then I want to be part of this. The foundation. Whatever it becomes. I don't want to lead it, not now. But I want to help." Robert leaned forward. "That's your choice. But if you're in all the way. That means meetings. That means transparency. And that means letting go of Jessica's strategies, at least for now." Adam didn't blink. "I've already told her. She's taking time off too. Said she needs to think about everything." Emily smiled faintly. "Good. Then let's begin." The conversation that followed was unlike any they'd had in years. It wasn't about mistakes or power, it was about vision. And this time, it included everyone in the room. By the time Adam left that night, he carried with him a draft plan for the new Foundation's pilot program, something Emily had been quietly shaping in the background, a mentorship network for small, family-owned businesses in rural Colorado. Robert had made notes in the margins. Adam said he would refine the structure and speak to a few contacts who might help with partnerships. When the house grew quiet again, Emily sat by the fireplace, legs tucked beneath her, a journal open in her lap. "This feels different," she said. Robert looked up from his book. "It is. It's not just about saving what we had." "No," he agreed. "It's about building what comes next." She wrote the words down. Slowly. Deliberately. And for the first time in a long time, they both looked toward the future, not with anxiety, but with purpose. A week later, on a crisp autumn evening, the Halden home was filled with a warmth that had been missing for some time. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the living room walls. The long dining table, which had so often been the silent witness of difficult conversations and long pauses, now held the gentle clatter of dishes being passed, laughter shared between hesitant smiles, and conversations that flowed without tension. Emily had insisted on preparing the meal herself. Nothing elaborate: roasted chicken, vegetables from the farmer's market, warm bread, and an apple crumble cooling on the counter, but it was a dinner made with care, and more importantly, made with intention. It wasn't just a meal. It was a marker. Adam had arrived early to help set the table, carrying 2 bottles of wine under one arm and a soft look in his eyes. Jessica arrived just after sunset, a little more reserved, but not withdrawn. She greeted Emily with quiet civility and even helped carry in a tray of drinks without needing to be asked. Robert, though cautious in his expectations, had spent the afternoon reviewing notes for the Foundation transition and was ready to discuss them, if the timing felt right. But tonight wasn't about documents or strategies. It wasn't about business at all. It was about something more delicate, stitching the human fabric back together. As they all sat down and began to eat, Emily looked around the table and allowed herself a quiet moment of gratitude. The silence, for once, felt comfortable. The kind of silence that lives between people who have already said the most important things and are now simply learning how to be in the same room again. "So," Emily said gently, "how's the walk-in mentorship session planning going?" Adam wiped his mouth with a napkin before answering. "Really well, actually. We're partnering with a community center in Boulder. They have a whole room we can use every Friday. I've reached out to a few retired small business owners who are interested in volunteering. One even used to run a home construction company, said he's excited to help younger folks navigate contracts." "That's excellent," Robert said. "It's exactly what we hoped for when we wrote that initial pilot." Jessica glanced over. "I read the revised mission statement this morning. The part about legacy as a platform, not a monument, it stayed with me." Emily offered a small smile. "That was Adam's phrasing." Jessica turned to him. "It was good." Adam, clearly moved by the compliment, nodded once. "Thanks." For the next half hour, they talked more freely. Jessica mentioned a few contacts in the nonprofit sector who might be interested in the Foundation's direction. Emily asked about a small bookstore in Denver that Adam had visited during his outreach trips. Robert joked that if they built a strong enough mentorship pipeline, they might have to open a business therapy program for stressed-out owners. Laughter followed. Not loud, but real. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't instant forgiveness or total emotional resolution. But it was movement. After dinner, they moved to the den, where Robert poured coffee and Emily brought in dessert. The conversation continued, quieter now, but deeper. They spoke about family traditions, about how the holidays were approaching, and whether they might spend Thanksgiving together for the first time in years. The suggestion came from Jessica. "We could do it here," she said. "I'd help cook. Maybe, even bring something that doesn't come from a box." Emily chuckled. "I think that sounds like a good idea." Later that evening, as Adam helped clear the dishes, he paused beside Emily in the kitchen. "I'm not taking this for granted," he said. She looked at him, a dish towel in hand. You shouldn't. But you also don't have to carry guilt forever. I still do, a little. That's part of learning. Adam leaned against the counter. I don't know what the next year looks like. Not entirely. But I know I want to be part of it. You are, she said. Just not in the way you thought you had to be. Meanwhile, Robert found himself speaking to Jessica in the hallway, near the front coat rack. I owe you a response, he said. From earlier. About the mission statement. You said it stayed with you. Jessica nodded. Robert folded his arms. It stayed with me too. And not just the words. The fact that you noticed. Jessica looked down. I wasn't fair to either of you. I can see that now. I saw your strength as rigidity. But this, what you're doing, it's the opposite. We don't expect everyone to understand our methods. Just to walk with us for a while. Jessica raised her eyes. Then maybe I can try. Robert nodded. That's all we ask. Later, after the house was quiet again and Adam and Jessica had gone, Emily and Robert sat on the couch with mugs of warm tea in hand. The dishes were done, the fire burned low, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and wood smoke. I didn't think we'd come back from it, Emily said. I didn't either, Robert replied. But here we are. Yes, he said. Not where we were. Maybe not even where we planned to be. But somewhere better, she added. He looked at her, and a soft smile crossed his face. Yes. Somewhere better. In the coming days, they would meet with lawyers to finalize the structure of the foundation. They would present the mentorship pilot to local small business groups. They would speak with a regional credit union interested in funding future community-based projects. The work ahead would be long and layered. But tonight was about none of that. Tonight was about family returning, not to what they had been, but to who they could still become. And that, Emily thought, was worth every fight, every late-night conversation, every moment of near collapse. It wasn't closure. It was a beginning. It was late November when Emily and Robert found themselves walking along the wooded trail that curved behind their property, a familiar path, one they had taken countless times over the years. The trees were nearly bare now, their leaves long fallen, carpeting the forest floor in muted shades of copper and gold. The wind was soft and cool, carrying with it the quiet of the approaching winter. They walked in comfortable silence, Robert's steps more confident now, the cane left behind on the porch. Emily wore a light scarf and gloves, her pace steady and sure. The trail had changed slightly since the season's start, but they both remembered where it bent, where the stones jutted from the soil, and where the forest opened just enough to show the sky. They reached that familiar clearing, the one where, not so long ago, their world had shifted with a misstep and an overheard sentence. It looked different now. Smaller. Less ominous. The trees hadn't moved, but the shadows had changed. Emily stood still for a moment, gazing at the patch of earth where she had fallen. It started here, she said softly. Robert followed her gaze. Yes. But it didn't end here. She turned to him, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. No. It didn't. They sat together on a nearby log, still damp from the morning's frost, and talked, not about the past, not about business or decisions or even family. They talked about simple things, a book Emily had been reading, a recipe Robert wanted to try, the strange way the birds had vanished a few days early this season. Eventually, Emily reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, folded letter. The paper was worn at the edges, handled many times before. It's from your grandfather, she said, handing it to Robert. He took it gently, unfolding it with care. I found it last week in an old drawer, behind some tax forms. It's dated the year we bought the old warehouse on Fulton. You remember? I do, he said, eyes scanning the letter. The handwriting was Robert's father's, strong, looped, and formal. The letter spoke not of numbers or legal strategies, but of legacy. Of building something that mattered. of believing in a future shaped by more than profit. Robert read the last line aloud. One day, this company won't be about money. It'll be about what you leave behind for the people who follow. Make sure they understand what that means. Emily let the words hang in the air before speaking. I think we forgot that. Somewhere along the way. Maybe, Robert said. But we remembered just in time. They walked back home slowly, dusk settling over the hills. The windows of the house glowed warmly in the distance, and the scent of something baking drifted faintly through the air as they approached. Inside, Adam and Jessica were in the kitchen, preparing for the evening's gathering, a small celebration marking the official formation of the foundation. The legal papers had been signed 2 days earlier. The company's restructuring was now formal, part nonprofit, part business incubator, part advisory network. A hybrid model designed to support local entrepreneurs and preserve the history of the original firm. The name would remain the same, Halden and Company, but the mission would be different. Clearer. Deeper. When they entered the kitchen, Emily was greeted with a soft smile from Jessica. The crumbles in the oven, she said. Apple and cinnamon. Just like the first dinner. Emily nodded. Thank you. Adam joined them, sleeves rolled up, a dish towel slung over one shoulder. I heard back from the community college, he said. They want us to give a talk next month. About legacy, mentorship, transition. They said it could help students think beyond startups and see the long game. Robert raised an eyebrow. They want all of us to speak? All of us, Adam confirmed. That evening, as guests began to arrive, Claire, Valeria, Marianne, Thomas, even Harold Beckman, they gathered in the living room where a small display had been set up near the fireplace. Photographs from the company's early days. Copies of the original business charter. A map of the new foundation's pilot programs. And, placed neatly in the center, a single framed quote from Robert's father's letter. Make sure they understand what that means. Emily stood beside it as people mingled. She watched as her guests examined the old photographs, asked questions about the mentorship network, and spoke with quiet excitement about the changes ahead. But she kept one eye on Adam, watching the way he moved through the room, no longer with the anxious energy of someone trying to prove himself, but with the calm presence of someone rediscovering who he was meant to be. He greeted people with ease, accepted both compliments and concerns, and spoke not like a man selling a vision, but like one living it. At one point in the evening, Claire pulled Emily aside. I meant to tell you, she said. One of our junior analysts, we assigned him to help with the nonprofit filings, he said he's never felt more proud to work here. Emily smiled. That means more than you know. Before the night ended, Robert took a moment to speak. He didn't stand at the head of the room, didn't raise a glass or bang on a table for silence. Instead, he waited until the conversations naturally ebbed, then simply said, I want to thank you. All of you. For believing in what this company could be. For standing by it, even when it was hard. For helping us find our way back to what mattered most. He glanced toward Emily. This foundation isn't an ending. It's not even a reinvention. It's a return. To values. To connection. To people. No one applauded. No one needed to. The moment was enough. As guests departed later that evening, one by one thanking them for their hospitality, Emily stood at the door, saying goodbye. When the last guest had gone, she turned back toward the house. It was quiet again. She walked into the den and found Robert sitting with the journal she had kept through the ordeal. He was reading one of the early pages, near the beginning. This one, he said, pointing, you wrote the night Adam stepped down. She leaned over to read it. We're not trying to save a company. We're trying to remember who we are. Emily closed the journal gently. I think we did. Robert nodded. The fire burned low in the hearth. Outside, the wind had settled. Inside, the warmth remained. And what they had built, this time, was meant to last.